Yep. Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Our project is about equity on campus. My name is Devina.
Hi, I'm Lindsay.
I'm Srija.
Hi, I'm Anisha, and I'll be talking about the organization of our presentation. So it is essentially broken up into 5 parts. So we'll be talking about essentially what is equity and some of our research about inequity on campus. And then we'll be talking about some of our user interviews that we've conducted and some of the methodology and stakeholder mapping we did. And then we'll end on some of the synthesis we did from those interviews, such as the greater themes and how can we's reproduced, and also some ideation and next steps will be mentioned. So moving on to the project timeline, this semester we mainly focused on the empathize, define, and ideate stages. So much of that time was spent on the empathize and define stages, which consisted of user research, and we really decided to spend a lot of our time on user research and conducting interviews to really understand the complex problem of inequity on campus and really get insight into people's personal experiences. Additionally, we kind of had a small ideation phase where we took a couple of the how can we's reproduced and had kind of a quicker design sprint over them. Okay, so moving on, we'll be talking about what is equity. So this is a definition from the Association of American Colleges and Universities. So essentially it says, equality is about sameness. It focuses on making sure everyone gets the same thing. Equity is about fairness. It ensures that each person gets what he or she needs. So this distinction is especially important to education where there is visible gaps in the opportunities and outcomes for large numbers of students. And historically, low-income students and students of color have been excluded from too many opportunities in higher education. And today's policies, expectations, and unspoken rules really perpetuate that problem. So as a team, we spent a lot of time researching different areas of inequity on campus, such as housing, physical mobility, professional inequity, and material accessibility. Additionally, we completed some secondary research on current demands for equity made by students on campus, and also current and past initiatives made by UT administration and student government. In order to narrow our scope on inequity, we decided to focus on one more specific area from these larger topics. So through our research, though, we realized that inequity of all kinds is really present on campus, and that regardless of which area we chose, there would be something inequitable to solve. So we ended up choosing material accessibility to deep dive with. So the question is, what is material accessibility? So from our team came up with a definition that said that material accessibility is a student's ability and ease of access to materials and supplies that are needed for their school endeavors. So examples of this really include computer software, laptops, textbooks, internet access, physical supplies, general funds. So essentially anything that a student needs to succeed in their classes and in college. So we really picked this particular area because it's especially relevant to the time period. So with COVID, many students are unable to have easy access to materials on the campus, such as like the co-op or the campus computer store, or even free university resources such as library books or like computers at the library. So, and additionally, also with everything being online, access to laptops and really internet access has become even more important. Also, many students are under financial strain during these times. So I'll pass it on to Devina, who will talk more about our user research.
Yeah, thanks, Anisha. So now that Anisha has given a brief overview of some of the topics we consider to do a deep dive in, namely material accessibility, I'll give a general overview of our user research process. And the user research is really considering the empathize stage of the design thinking process. So we started with a stakeholder mapping to get a better lay of the land of people involved in this work and situation that might have interest in the work we're doing. We also conducted a decent amount of interviews, and this was mainly to hear people's experiences with equity and also material accessibility. So while we did ask questions related to people's experiences with inequity or equity at UT, we also honed in specifically about material accessibility. Lastly, we did create a survey. However, we didn't really push out the survey much as we talked as a team about it, and we really did think focusing on interviews with our stakeholders, and primarily these interviews consisted with students and professors, was a better route to go for the semester. So this is our stakeholder mapping we created near the beginning of the work we did with this project. And so to kind of explain this chart, as you can see on the y-axis, there's influence, and on the x, there is how interested they are in the work we're doing. And so to give an example, you can see UT students is all over here on the far right side because they have high interest, but they're kind of lower in the diagram because they necessarily don't have that much influence on the situation. UT donors and alumni are a lot higher up in terms of influence. And we namely put that there because in terms of grants, scholarships, funds, we think UT donors and alumni tend to have a lot of say and stake and the availability to actually donate to those causes. Dean of Students is also another person we put as high influence, again, because they're the Dean of Students. And as you can see, for example, professors, who is another group that we interviewed heavily, is actually, it really depends on the professor, but professors as a whole is typically on the lower interest side than, say, students. And they also don't necessarily have that much influence compared to UT admin or Dean of Students. So that's just, again, to kind of give a general understanding of some of the people we considered in this project. Next, I'm going to go over some of the key quotes and users that we interviewed. And to kind of, before diving into some of these people and the quotes that they said, the main takeaway to kind of think about is that a lot of these quotes, while they are from individual people, we really saw these quotes as ideas that were echoed throughout numerous interviews, not just through these individual interviews, but really things that we saw across all our interviews, and specific quotes from specific people kind of highlighted that in a good way that I think you guys will see. So starting with a graduate student, she is an MA in design, and she said having to buy expensive subscriptions and software like Adobe Creative Cloud for a program where it is essential to have CC is a bit of a letdown. So this was actually a pretty common idea we saw throughout a lot of our student interviews. It's people saying, I need this expensive subscription, I need this computer software to complete my classes, and it costs a lot of money, and it's kind of a letdown. The professors aren't really considering that. And it's also touching on inequity because for some people, they can easily get these things. And for some people, they have to work a lot harder to make ends meet and to kind of even do workarounds to produce the same quality things without the access or the means to access. Second, we look at a senior student. She is Plan 2 and government, and she said bureaucracy is inequitable, especially the time spent working on issues. It's not service-oriented, it's about regulation. I think this quote is pretty interesting. I think it's very gov related. And really she's talking that UT is a big bureaucracy. There are lots of rules and regulations. And even if someone wanted something to happen, maybe a professor, maybe someone else on UT admin, there's so many processes in place. It's just, it's not service oriented. It's not, you want to get someone something and it would take a super long time. It's really a lot more about regulation. And again, even though not everyone that we interviewed said this explicitly, this was a common thought we saw recurring throughout our interviews. Thirdly, we interviewed a Texas Creative student. He said, a friend of mine in Texas Creative didn't have a functional laptop. He was making all these incredible designs using his phone. He was forced to be resilient. Again, this person, I think, was really empathetic. He was talking about experiences with himself and also all the people he knew. And specifically, he was saying someone that was forced to be resilient, which I think is really like a pretty powerful quote. But this person didn't have the means to create what he needed to create. So he really had to make ends meet and work harder to get things done. Lastly, we look at a PhD student and professor. She said, since my class is required for all majors, I try to make all of the extra resources needed available online. This way, students don't have to spend more money than they already do for classes. I think this is a really positive light. This lady, she is the professor for one of the intro RTF classes. So a lot of students go through her and she works extra hard to make sure things are accessible for all her students, which was really nice to see that a professor was working harder to do that. And I'm going to pass it off to Lindsay to go into themes.
Thanks, Devina. So after we developed empathy through our user interviews, we took our data and synthesized this, which led to four key themes. So one, within the UT system, competing priorities do not always place students' immediate interests at the center. Two, a student's network can influence workarounds that hide the inequities within the UT system. Three, unexpected labor costs and the lack of transparency increase frustrations and minimize access within certain spaces. And lastly, material access gaps have widened during the pandemic. So these are the themes that we really took to heart as we developed our How Can We's. But before we get to that, overall, we saw that there was a tension between this bottom up and top down action within the UT system. And so this feeling is really exemplified by this quote. It's always the students having to make ends meet, and it's always students making things happen, according to a Texas Creative student. And we really saw that students are taking a lot of action, and there's a lot of tension between what's happening from the admin and faculty in terms of competing priorities. And with that, I'll pass it off to Shrija to talk about our How Can We's.
Thanks, Lindsay. So from the framework that Lindsay mentioned, we ended up creating 6 main How Can We's. How can we help professors adapt to online learning? How can we help students feel comfortable in approaching their professors? How can we help professors accommodate the individual needs of a student? How can we encourage students to take initiative on campus? How can we help students create a network of academic success with COVID? And how can we connect students to alternative materials for classes and extracurriculars? From these 6 How Can We's, we actually ran 2 ideation sprints. The first ideation sprint was revolved around how can we help students create their network for academic success with COVID. So once we ran our ideation sprint, we kind of grouped all of our ideas in 4 main buckets. The first bucket related to ideas involving virtual connection. The second bucket related to ideas involving materials. For example, a lot of ideas we had related to creating school kits like you had in elementary school. Our third bucket revolved around professional development, and our last bucket revolved around themes with social engagement. So looking at our second ideation session, we focused on how can we help professors accommodate the individual needs of a student. And after ideating, we kind of found that our ideas fall within 6 main buckets. The first being ideas related to in-class check-ins, the second being ideas related to materials, the third being ideas that are really professor driven. For example, having professors hand out cards at the beginning of a semester that students can fill out with their, maybe in like ways that they learn, what their personality types are like, what their strengths and weaknesses are. Our fourth bucket related to ideas of social engagement. Our fifth bucket related to ideas involving data collection, for example, anonymous forms and surveys. And our last bucket related to ideas revolving around flexibility. For example, having syllabuses that you can create your own path or being flexible with deadlines. So now that we've kind of taken you through what we've done this past semester, we also wanted to touch on what we were thinking about in the future that we would want to focus on. First, Devina showed you guys that we have a lot of stakeholders that we were thinking about, and we would love to reach out to more stakeholders. Specifically, we'd like to focus next on diversity and inclusive and equity councils on campus, as well as various clubs like student government. Additionally, we want to make sure that we increase diversity within the people we interview. And one way that we would think about doing this is trying to push our survey out to groups that we don't normally interact with on campus. Additionally, when thinking about issues of equity, that also goes hand in hand with diversity and inclusivity. So I think something we wanted to think about next semester is how we can increase diversity within our own team in order to make sure we're taking advantage of multiple perspectives. And finally, we want to ideate more and also start prototyping.
Thank you. That was it for the work that we've done with the Equity on Campus project this semester. And please let us know if you have any questions or feedback.
Hi, it's Doreen. Great presentation, everyone. So a question I have when I look at this, and obviously being on the flip side of this and seeing all of the administration work that went on, how much when you took into your, did you take into account when you did all your interviews about talking to administration? There was an emergency fund set up, all the colleges got emergency funds that were put out there. How much did you take that into account? Because I think in this particular, listening to this and concentrating on the COVID issue was probably slightly different and has to be separated from kind of general day-to-day or normal year.
Yeah, I think also we did not interview anyone from UT admin. We interviewed professors, and I think there is a difference between professors and UT admin as well. But when we say, like, I guess bottom up versus top down, and students felt like they didn't feel that people at the top, whether it be professors or UT admin, were equally reaching out as much students were putting effort to make ends meet. I think that was more in terms of everyday things, not necessarily in terms of COVID, but I do think COVID did put more strain on specific things. Like, students don't have internet access at some of their homes, and it's like, how am I supposed to do my classes? And I think although there might be solutions for that UT admin or professors have thought out, it's not say every professor has thought that out, or it's not say it's made so obvious that there are solutions available to students. So it's also that, like, gap between, are students aware of certain things? Are things being advertised properly to students? That's kind of also something that's been brought up in some of the interviews.
I think that's a really good around the communication issues. Are students reading the emails that they're getting? Because that's how the communication happens. It happens on emails and through Instagram, like Facebook. And so is that connection happening? Because a lot of the things that you are bringing up were things that were very heavily addressed. So it'd be interesting to find, when you go down and do your next level of exploration, to really look into the community, because it seems like there's an enormous gap. Not saying that there are not issues around equity, but it'd be interesting to see where the communication gaps are, because I think if we can close some of those communication gaps, we can actually close this gap a little bit too. But this is great work. Thanks, ladies. Terrific.
Thank you.
I might build on what Doreen was saying as well. So first of all, just wanted to say also great work. I think it's a really poignant and very like topical topic, which is not exactly what I meant, but it's like of the moment. So I think it's like really great to be working on this and realizing that like there's a lot of opportunity to influence this particular topic right now. I think one of the things I might recommend, and I would be happy to maybe work on it with you. And I know that Lindsay reached out and I just got back a little too late to really sort of contribute to this project in the same way. But I think it might be really interesting to map out like a diagram or like a stakeholder map or something, the individuals that are in this. I really liked your 2x2 where you're sort of putting the different roles into it. But higher education has a funny trajectory of like, who has power, who doesn't have power, like who makes decisions, who puts those, and then also like, I think you sort of mapped some of it, like who's actually interested in doing something. So it's very interesting, like professors actually have a ton of power in this system, but are completely motivated, self-motivated, like to write books or publish research or do a clinical trial or something. But the administration or the admin side is like the ones who are sort of enacting those decisions, but really they're still beholden to professors who sort of, and then there's like the president of the university, and then there's students, and then there's student government. So anyway, I think it might be interesting to kind of map out like, where is the role of power in the system, who can change it? And the thing to layer onto it is like, who is actually incentivized to change some of these things? Because on your 2x2, you did mention that like professors are kind of low interest, low influence, which is like true, but also complicated, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And different types of professors are different things. There are, the tenure track system at the university means that you are guaranteed a job for your entire life. So there's nothing that you could possibly do outside of rare exceptions to lose your job. So like, what's their motivation to change how they teach or to care more about students? Or so all that I'm really saying is like, I think in the spring, as you continue to layer this in, it's a wonderful topic. It's a complex topic. And I love that your team is thinking about this as like higher education. I think you, or more or less you said that it's not service focused. It's not actually student focused. And I think that's a real opportunity to highlight that, like, that the students are the ones, it's like students are why universities exist and how they pay the bills, but the system is not set in place to like make students be more successful. So, and I'm sure, yeah. So anyway, and Doreen of all people could probably speak to this a lot more too, and we can get into it another day. But like, I think it's a really powerful topic. And I think you've just started to scrape the surface of like, who are the ones who have power, who are the ones who have influence, and those aren't always the same thing. And so you might be able to make something really great happen. So I'll take a step back. Thanks so much. Good job, y'all. Really great job.
Thank you. And thank you for the insight. Yeah, that was helpful and stuff that we'll definitely consider.
Are there any other questions before we move on?
If there aren't any questions, we can take a quick 5-minute break. That sounds good with everybody.